Welcome, foolish mortals, to the Haunted Mansion. I am your host, your ghost host. Our tour begins here in the gallery, full of residents as they appeared in their corruptible, mortal state. But that's not entirely accurate. Some of our portraits illustrate individuals as they appeared in their immortal state. Kindly watch your step and take a seat in one of our doom buggies, because tonight we are going to discuss one of the only undead residents of the Haunted Mansion. But heed this warning. The spirits will materialize only if you remain safely seated with your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the vehicle. While dismemberment might seem like a good time, our happy haunts aren't likely to give you a hand, should you decide to ignore their warning. Previously, we've discussed a number of portraits, like our aging beauty, Miss April November. She's part of a ghastly group of ghosts known as the Sinister 11. Additional members include the couple, Medusa, Jack the Ripper, the Ogre, the Hatchet Man, the Witch, the Mariner, the Opera Glasses Lady, the Arsonist, and a grim, grinning ghost we call the Count. The first thing you'll probably notice about the portrait is that his eyes follow you around the room. If the Count's gaze isn't too distracting, and his smile isn't too unnerving, you'll likely appreciate the warm yellow glow of the lantern he's carrying to help him navigate the darkness. In the background, you might see the light of a candle sitting on top of what looks like a coffin. Truth be told, this painting is actually the second portrait of the Count. The first portrait was illustrated by artist, Imagineer Mark Davis, and it wasn't just any painting. It was meant to be a changing portrait. As guests would move around the mansion, the image would alter. The Count would change from an unsettling figure to a giant bat, with several more flying around in the background. While this particular metamorphosis never materialized in the mansion, it did manage to make an appearance in the Haunted Mansion comic book in 2007. His ability to transform into a bat would lead most mortals to believe that the Count is in fact a member of the unliving, Nosferatu, what most of you probably refer to as a vampire.
The virginal brides file past his tomb, strewn with time's dead flowers, bereft in deathly bloom, alone in a darkened room. The Count.
A vampire is a cursed creature with a pale complexion and an insatiable desire to feed off the blood of the living. Most vampires can only hunt at night and have large fangs that allow them to suck blood out of their prey. In addition to their hatred of sunlight, they also abhor garlic and anything that's shaped like a crucifix. Oh, and if you're going to give a vampire a steak, make sure it's extremely rare, and not the wooden kind. Now, there have been several notable vampires like Edward Cullen, Lily Munster, Nandor the Relentless, and Barnabas Collins.
Good evening, Barnabas Collins. I've been waiting for you for a long time. A long, long time.
Have you?
Yes,
Why?
because I know what you are.
With so many diabolical individuals lurking around the vampire scene, you're probably left wondering, what's the true identity of the Count haunting our creepy crypt? Well, no one seems to know for sure, but here are a few options that have been whispered about the mansion. Lord Ravencroft was a figure some foolish mortals caught glimpses of back in the 1990s. While fashion at the time included flannel shirts and neon windbreakers, Ravencroft was described as a mysterious figure elegantly dressed, with an Eastern European accent he'd used to seduce potential victims. He was only ever seen for a short time at the Haunted Mansion in California, and only during special events in the fall. In the decades since, there have been no sightings, but if you search hard enough, you might find theme park attendees able to share their stories of their encounter with Lord Ravencroft. The Tales from the Haunted Mansion are a series of stories chronicled by librarian and author Amicus Arcane. In his account, the figure in the portrait is Count Lupescu, a transplant from Romania. For 500 years, this vampire lay dormant until he was awoken by one of his descendants. He resents being a vampire, but must feed on the blood of local villagers out of necessity. Count Lupescu moves to the Haunted Mansion in order to avoid hurting more peasants. Unfortunately, the Haunted Mansion has a strict no-pet policy, and since the Count can transform into both a bat and a wolf, he's forced to spend his nights wandering the graveyard adjacent to our creepy crypt. Not Lord Morris, not Morris the Cruel or Morris the Unholy, not even Count Morris von Morris III, just Morris. He's another obscure vampire with a connection to the Haunted Mansion. If you've never heard the story of the vampire's midnight madness, then listen closely. In this particular tale, Morris the vampire roams the cemetery at night. Unfortunately for Morris, he's afraid of the dark. Try to imagine a vampire who's afraid of the dark. Absolutely tragic. As Morris creeps around the graveyard, he stumbles across a skull that's lying on the ground and panics. He swings his arms and knocks a gargoyle off a nearby tombstone. This particular story was illustrated in 1974 as part of a model kit sold for the Haunted Mansion and was licensed by the Walt Disney Company. Now, there are few people who have visited the Haunted Mansion that aren't familiar with the coffin occupant. As your doom buggy glides through the conservatory, you'll be reminded that all of our guests are dying to meet you. In fact, this one can hardly contain himself.
The air got colder, and I could hear the rain splashing against windows. I walked down the hall, and there in the conservatory was a coffin. "Don't scream," the ghost host warned. "You may wake up one of our guests." It's a coffin. Something's trying to get out.
In the Ghost Gallery, we find out his name is Jamie. For those of you not familiar with the Ghost Gallery, they are a series of stories once shared by cast members employed by the Haunted Mansion. Now, Jamie is engaged to little Leota, the frightening female phantom that bids you farewell as you leave our ghostly retreat. Unbeknownst to Jamie, little Leota has an affair with a man known as Nicholas Crown. Little Leota and Nicholas concoct a plan to convince her fiancé that he's a vampire and should hide from sunlight. When Jamie takes refuge in a nearby coffin, little Leota nails it shut and runs off with Nicholas. Jamie is left inside the coffin, trying to claw his way out. attendees will notice a pair of eerie hands grasping the lid of the coffin, trying to find a way out. I'm not sure how you feel about it, but it's one of my favorite parts of the tour. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that there's no vampire quite as notorious as Count Dracula. Vlad Dracul, or Vlad the Impaler, was born in Romania and ruled the region of Wallachia for part of the 15th century. Legends describe a man who would impale his enemies with a wooden stake and dine amongst his victims, even dipping his bread in their blood. There are some who believe that Bram Stoker's book Dracula was inspired by Vlad. Count Dracula was feared by all the villagers who lived underneath the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains. In the book, we also learn that Dracula's strange affliction is likely a result of dark magic and a possible pact with the devil. After his death, it is said that Dracula returns as a vampire and lives several centuries in his castle alongside his brides.
Dracula? Oh, what's he done to you, dearie? Tell me.
He came to me. He opened a thing in his arm, and he made me drink.
By the end of the novel, Dracula meets his demise for a second time, having his throat slit by a silver blade. Interestingly enough, the name Dracula has appeared in several different versions of the Haunted Mansion. In one of Ken Anderson's early drafts of the Haunted Mansion, Dracula would have been included on a guest list for a swinging wedding party. Additional attendees would have included the Lonesome Ghosts, Frankenstein's monster, and the Headless Horseman. Another concept that was proposed for the Haunted Mansion in Tokyo was a burial crypt for famous villains. As you've probably guessed, Dracula would have been one of several villains to retire here, alongside the Roman Emperor Nero, Attila the Hun, Bluebeard, Jack the Ripper, and one of the mansion's favorite femme fatales, the Gorgon known as Medusa. These references to Dracula, alongside the vampire's notoriety, has given fans of the Haunted Mansion reason to believe that he might very well be the true identity of the Count. It's definitely become one of the most popular theories. But what do you think? Which one of these identities seem most plausible? Could it be a composite of all four? Please, tell us your thoughts. And why not take a moment to watch one of these other films highlighting the residents of the Haunted Mansion?